Good day, ma'am. Good day, classmates. Today, we will discuss the concept of policy implementation. Here's the content of our topic. Define the policy implementation. Introduce the models of policy implementation, the factors for policy implementation, and the actors or implementers of the policies. Policy implementation is an important component in the policy process. It is a lengthy process that begins from designing the content of a policy to achieving the end results. Policy implementation determines the success or failure of a policy. Petrus and Brainerd 2005 observed a limitation in understanding the meaning and scope of a policy implementation. According to them, the early studies viewed policy implementation merely as an administrative task or choice. It was assumed that once the policy had been legislated and approved, the implementation would take place without any further tasks. As they argue, this line of thought ignored or glossed over complexities involved in policy implementation. They recognized the existing ambiguity about the beginning of policy implementation and its ending. There are three important elements of policy implementation. These are: first, policy implementation is nothing but achieving the goals of a policy which are designed at the beginning of a policy. Second, policy implementation entails the involvement of various actors such as governments, civil society organizations, business groups, and individuals. Third, planning and programming of a policy are also considered to be critical in the process of policy implementation.
Models of policy implementation. Public policies are implemented in three ways, and these ways are also known as models of policy implementation. A look at these models will help us in understanding the diverse paths to implementation of public policies. There are three models of policy implementation: the first generation model, second generation model, and the third generation model. What are these models? First generation model. First generation model adopts top-down approach to implement of public policy. This approach believes that effective implementation requires a top-down system of control and communications and resources to the job. It focuses on politicians and officials and examines the extent to which administrators carry out or fail to carry out the decisions of the government. It seeks to find out the reasons underlying the extent of the implementation conducted. Second generation model. The second generation model, on the other hand, applies bottom-up analysis to implementation. This approach presumes that success or failure of many programs depends on the commitment and skills of the actors directly involved in the policy implementation. These actors are called street-level bureaucrats by Michael Lipsky. The second approach focuses its attention on both formal and informal relationships constituting the policy subsystems involved in both designing and implementing policies. It urges that the street-level bureaucrats must be taken into account. Bottom-up model lays straight on the negotiation and consensus building in the public service delivery.
The third generation model. The third generation implementation model or theory uses theory to assist behavioral discretion of bureaucrats in policy implementation. It argues that it is easier to implement policy and decisions which are having a single factor than those having multiple factors. For instance, implementing road safety policies is easier than implementing the policy of poverty eradication. In such circumstances, the administrative officials tend to focus on easily implementable policies rather than difficult ones. This gives enough scope for them to use their discretion. Different levels of discretion lead to different regulation style. For instance, regulators will use prosecution to make the regulated person rules and regulation. If that is not possible, the regulators will start using coercion. The extent of coercion use depends on the degree of non-compliance of the rules by the regulated. Apart from the game theory, third generation implementation theory uses principal agent theory to understand how bureaucrats use their discretion in a socio-political and cultural settings.
The factors for policy implementation. There are a few important factors that are critical in the process of policy implementation. Walt and Gilson, 1984, identified 4 such important factors in formulation as well as implementation of a policy. And these are: number 1, the content of the policy. The content of the policy should have the substantive information and material contained within a policy in relation to the policy's requirements. Number 2, the nature of the policy. Number 3, the actors involved in the process. Number 4, the context in which the policy is designed and must be implemented. Those are the 4 factors by Walt and Gilson. Effective implementation determines the success of any public policy. It looks into achieve the predesigned objectives and desired outcomes. You can say that your public policy is successful when it is being implemented effectively, or it is being followed by the public, or to where it is being implemented. While delineating other important factors for the success of a policy, McLowell, 1987, states 2 critical factors that contribute to the success of a policy. McLowell said that there are 2 critical factors that contribute to the success of a policy, which is the local capacity and the will or motivation. Capacity, or the policy implementers. Policy implementers, for example, the best example for this is one of the government agency, the PNP, the Philippine National Police, and will of motivation to implement solely depends upon the implementer's response that can influence the policy. So, ang mga police or those or implementers, sila mo'y kanang magpatuman o kanang magpa-stricto para matuman ang balaod, or bisan unsa ilahang mga pagabuhaton para matuman ang balaod. Unya, if there's any violation, so they make a move, so they act to implement the law or the policy effectively.
In addition to these factors, Loftley also identified 2 factors, that is, balance of pressure and support. First, pressure is required in the process of policy formulation as it ensures the policymakers to focus attention on preparing targeted-oriented objectives. Second, support is needed to enable successful implementation. Effective policy implementation ensures quality of delivery and reduces inconsistencies among service providers. In sum, it can be said that policy implementation is critical for a policy without which its success cannot be measured.
Factors implementers of policies. Theoretically speaking, politicians play a significant role in overseeing and evaluating the policy implementation. They are largely independent on bureaucrats in this exercise. Sometimes, policy implementation is also supplemented by the non-government officials. Oringo's mainly range